To switch tactics entirely, I want to talk about how 1 out of every 10 Wall Street employees is a psychopath. I just love the headline. It was in the Huffington Post, and the moment I saw this, I said, I have got to talk about this headline.
1 out of every 10.
1 out of every 10. And I'll tell you what, the article is pretty convincing. It's in Huffington Post, and it says 1 out of every 10 Wall Street employees is likely a clinical psychopath, writes journalist Sherry Duchovny in an upcoming issue of the trade publication CFA Magazine. In the general population, the rate is closer to 1%. Well, it says here, a clinical psychopath is bright, gregarious, and charming. He lies easily and often and may have trouble feeling empathy for other people. He's probably also more willing to take dangerous risks, either because he doesn't understand the consequences or because he simply doesn't care. An appetite for risk can seem like a positive business trait on Wall Street, where big gambles sometimes lead to big rewards, which leads me to mentioning one of our last shows. I can't remember which show it was on, where I also mentioned the research that had been tied to, at one time, car salespeople, and how a lot of firms, a lot of car dealerships tested for sociopathology, and if somebody was a mild sociopath, they would hire him because they would prefer to have somebody that didn't have too much of a conscience selling cars for them, rather than, somebody who was a little too worried about putting grandma in an old clunker and sending her out the door. So again, sometimes somebody who's a sociopath or a psychopath, as this person puts it, which is kind of an outdated term, can be a positive asset to a company. And it says here, this is hardly the first time that mental illness has been equated with a certain capacity for professional success, especially in the financial sector, where some stock traders have actually scored higher than diagnosed psychopaths on tests that measure competitiveness and attraction to risk. So a very interesting article. And
I think you mentioned also with the car salesman that there's a lot of management as well. It's definitely a trait in, you can see it in the management, I think, which is interesting. And so I think there's a higher percentage of psychopaths in management. And we're talking about people.
Thanks.
We're talking about people. I mean, it's just a certain way that your brain works, and there's certain traits that they have, and it does. I think those are good descriptions, and I think that describes an entrepreneur, or describes somebody that's going to take risk.
Now that's interesting. I don't know if it would or not, but I will say that with entrepreneurs, studies do show that they don't like to play well with others. But how much of that is true sociopathology, I don't know. But studies do repeatedly uphold the fact that the entrepreneur is the typical person who does not do well in a business environment on his, working for somebody else.
I think those are good traits to have if you're going to have to tell somebody that, really lay it out for them that, here's where you're not doing well in your job. You got to kind of have a little bit of separation from that conscience. You're dealing with 100 people's lives, from family to anything. You can't bring all of that into it. You have to be able to separate them from, what the business is trying to achieve.
And this is Dr. Drake. I'm joined by Ben Kaler. And interestingly enough, we are lucky enough to have the Pillais. Dr. Pillais is going to be doing the show right after mine, and his wife. Wonderful couple. And Dr. Pillais was just telling me that basically the definition of a sociopath is someone with completely no conscience whatsoever. Psychopath sounds like would have been too strong a word to use for the Wall Street employees, as they're not carving anybody up, but sociopath means devoid of conscience. And back to management styles, I would have to say some of the managers I've had in the past probably were devoid of conscience, but in general, at least in my case, I never had a problem telling somebody they were fired if they weren't doing their job. I really didn't. And yet I still cared about them as a person. I wanted them to go on and have a happy life. So to me,
well, I think somewhat of the separation.
Oh, Mike wants to say something. Our producer, Mike.
Well, I've heard people say that I've never fired anybody. They fire themselves.
Ah, that's a very good point too. And I like that saying a lot, because in my experience, when I've had to fire people, it was after repeated warnings. I've even had times where I've been like, please, you're so good. Don't come in late anymore. You're setting a bad example for the team. Right. I'm going to have to fire you. I don't want to do this.
Or I've heard some people, too, say, you know what? I just give them enough rope to hang themselves.
Right. Yeah, which I don't like to do, but I'm more of the coach type of manager. I'm the kind that always likes to try to nurture somebody into the job they're in. I don't like letting people just sink or swim, but a lot of people out there do. And that's also something that the younger generation has to learn. The younger generation is called the entitlement generation for a reason. A lot of times they'll come, and I know you are the exception, Ben, so you're definitely not in that. But Ben and I are of different generations, and Ben is of the younger generation, and many of them tend to feel that they deserve that job. They don't really have to work for it. There are all kinds of reports of them coming into jobs and saying, well, when are my 2 weeks of vacation? I expect this. I expect that. Where's my corner office? It's phenomenal to see how many people in the entitlement generation come in expecting to have life handed to them just on a platter, and they're very shocked when they're told, hey, get to work, sink or swim, buddy.
Yeah, so it's an eye-opener, it's for sure. But it doesn't come easy. That's why you all start pretty much at the same place. Mm-hmm. You know, the harder you work and the smarter you work, that's the only way you're going to get there. You're not going to get there. Just nobody's going to hand it to you. That's the truth.
You know, so many of us too have the lottery mentality, thinking that somehow we're going to beat the system, and the only way to beat the system is to do. There's a great old book by P.T. Barnum. I can't remember the name of it, but he wrote in the 1800s, and of course he was the one who said, or supposedly said, there's a sucker born every minute. But his business book is dead on, and he outlined management and business principles way before they started teaching them in colleges, I believe, and very clear cut. He said, work hard. You know, there's no easy answer except work hard, and you'll get there. And something to be remembered even now.